think I'm gonna try to stay for more than 1.5 hours today, but I'm gonna put the timer for 1.5 hours. Probably gonna start by doing the Italian thing. It's because I had coffee today, so I think I'm gonna try to stay more than 1.5 hours. So I'm gonna start by doing the Italian stuff, since I'm gonna stay more time. And then I put the title for studying because I think that's what I'm gonna do most of the time. Like, I'm gonna try to work on the website, but I don't want to put the title as working on the website because I think that it's just gonna take a lot of time, and I'm probably gonna watch all these videos here because I don't have the knowledge yet or the experience. Like, I spent a lot of time studying this already, the WebGL, but there's a lot of stuff to study, and I realized that there is some like integrations with ngraph and this other library here. This library is used with, like, it's a library built for working with WebGL, as far as I understand, to build 3D graphs. And then there's another library which is fabric.js, which builds 2D graphs. So what I'm thinking about it, like, this is a question that I had and I'm still not 100% sure, but I think what I'm gonna do is to try to make it work with fabric.js first and build 2D because 2D is faster. But then ideally I would have the option to either build a graph 2D or 3D, because the 3D animations look really good, and I think it would be awesome if I could make it work with the 3D, because it's going to be a lot better to visualize what's happening on the script. But the challenging part about this is that it's putting the event listeners and also understanding how to navigate through the graph, because it's extremely complicated. And this is the reason why you have all these libraries, because not only to create the shape of the nodes and the graph itself, but also to move the canvas, you need to do a lot of calculations. And you need to do matrix calculations, and that's the stuff that I'm struggling to understand, because WebGL accepts as far as I understand now, you have the shader, and then you have something else that I think is fragment, yeah. Vertex shader and vertex fragment. The shader is the thing that determines the position of the stuff that you're gonna draw, and the fragment is the stuff that determines the contrast. And the contrast is the thing that gives the illusion of 3D. So it's like you're passing data to the GPU through a buffer, and you have to pass these points, and then from these points the GPU calculates the contrast of the thing, and then it sends back to the canvas. And that's how the graphs are created. But then the issue is that for everything, like, this is the stuff that is confusing to me so far, which is, like, what is the correct way to pass the information to the buffer? Because the tutorials that I've seen so far, they are making triangles, which is easier because you're passing everything as a vector. But if you're going to do a circle, then I don't understand really well how to pass the information so that the buffer creates, the GPU creates a node here. And then from that information, it creates the lines. The other thing that I don't understand really well is that they say on the tutorials that is like a square matrix that goes from -1 to 1 or something like that, or 0 to 1. So, and these are the maximum values that it goes to. So I'm struggling to understand, like, what is the relationship between that matrix and the overall position of the canvas in the website. So this is the stuff that I'm trying to clarify. But I think what I'm gonna start by doing today is so this is the stuff from the other project that they have here, which is graph start, from this library ngraph, which I think I closed the repo. Oh, this one. So I'm pretty much getting this. I got all the code for this project, and then I put on my project here. And also I wasn't being able to download the graph from the data. So what I decided to do, and I think that's much better, is to just create a simple graph here first, because that way I don't need to, every time that I want to test something, I don't need to run the script from Python to send the data to see what effect it's going to have on the graph. So I think it's better to have this easy graph first, so I understand how everything works when building the graph and building the simulation. And only after I understand everything, then I try to integrate the data. But for this one, it wasn't loading the graph. I don't know why. But this one, it loads the graph. But then I still have to put, and this is another challenge, which is doing the physics simulation. And that's the part that I want to integrate as well. But the first thing that I think I'm going to do is try to incorporate the text. And the reason why is because on this project, the text works. Because the way that he coded, he's using a JSON file from the project that contains the information for the font, and then he makes an API request and gets the font. But I don't want to use that. I don't want to do that like that. And I think that this is a good way to learn, which is I'm going to try to remake everything that he did, but step by step. So I think that the first thing is to try to integrate my own text into the stuff that I already have there. And I also changed the size of the canvas. And also another thing that I'm thinking about doing is just following one of these tutorials here to add some stuff on the site before. So I have like a main page and a navigation bar. And then one of those pages is this page here. Because that stuff I think is more simple to do. But at the same time, I think that's like, maybe I should focus on so this is another thing that I'm not 100% sure about, which I'm still debating in my mind, because the most challenging thing and the most important thing is the way that you visualize the thing. And the rest is like just basic stuff that it shouldn't be that hard to do, because even if it takes me a long time because I don't understand Svelte really well, there still is going to be a lot of information out there about how to do that, I think. But this part of building the graph and building the simulation, I think is the hardest part. So maybe I should focus on that first. Yeah, but the problem with this one is that it doesn't have the physics simulation and it doesn't have the labels. So I think I'm going to try to do the labels first. And I removed some of the code because on this one, it is using this MSDF text collection file. It was using that to load the thing, but then I removed the part that it makes the API request. And as far as I understand now, you have to use this define program. So the way that he did it on this framework is to create another stuff, which is like another API that allows you to interface with WebGL. So this library contains a bunch of different functions that have predefined, like a predefined framework to communicate with WebGL through the buffers and all of that stuff. So he uses that to create the programs, and the programs are the stuff that you do to communicate with to pass the information through the buffer, and then you use this language here, which is, I would assume that this is the vertex shader, and then the fragment shader here. And then you put the code that is going to be used through this stuff here, and you put other parameters here, and then you pass to this thing, which comes from this library here. And this is what you use to communicate with WebGL. But the issue here is that I removed the code for getting the font. So what I have to do is to search on the internet, I think, on how to make it so that I can have my own font here. And I also have to understand this language because I don't understand really well. But as far as I understand, Mat4 and Vec4 are both libraries that you can use to do calculations on this language here, which is the language used for WebGL. And then the attribute is this is the position, and then you have the color here. So the position determines the vectors that are going to be created, and then the color determines the contrast, and then it uses that to create the animation on the canvas. So it's tough because the tutorials are not very clear. Like, just watching the tutorials, I couldn't understand really well how to build it for myself, the thing, because I don't understand the language really well. So and this is the reason why I want to put the title for studying, because I'm probably going to spend a lot of time reading the documentation and not doing anything. And maybe watching videos as well. I think I'm going to try to use ChatGPT to study this integration here from this repository, which is this one, I think, this one. These are the functions that are being used there. So one thing you can do is just pass the link to ChatGPT directly from the file, and then it's gonna know like what happens here, and then I can use ChatGPT to help me understand more how everything is integrated. But the issue is that a lot of the times ChatGPT talks a lot of shit that doesn't make sense. So that's kind of hard to parse, like how much to trust the stuff that ChatGPT is saying. And sometimes it's just better to look at the source code and go from what you see here. But after I do that, after I'm able to put the labels, then I think that the next step is to, because the way that they're doing on this one is that they use another repository, which is the force layout. And then this force layout allows you to do this. So I think what I'm gonna do is study the force layout and how it does this, because I don't want the graph to be in a fixed position. I want to add event listener so I can move the graph, and so that it looks like a lot more like the VJS graph, where I can add functionality. So this is the hardest part, is understanding like what is the best software design approach to make observables, which are event listeners that listen for the events on the graph, and synchronize that with the data flow of the WebSockets so that I can add any functionality that I want and make the graph look however I want. And I'm probably gonna have to add a physics engine as well. And then like it's the most challenging, but is the most interesting as well, because depending on the physics engine, you can encapsulate a bunch of different things on the graph. And then like from that, I think from those fundamentals, then there's like an infinite amount of things that you can do. That's why it's really interesting to me. Because then you can incorporate ChatGPT and it can like create 3D graphs and put whatever information you want about the code. And then it's like being able to visualize in real time what's happening every time you execute a script and how it creates the nodes and how everything is integrated. And then maybe creating multiple different graphs that allows you to compare different frameworks and like what's the difference between the data flow in different frameworks, and reason about why different frameworks are better for different types of things. I think that's like gonna be very, very useful, but extremely hard to do as well. So I think I'm gonna do this first, and it's probably gonna take a lot of time just studying stuff. And this is the annoying thing in the beginning, when you're learning something new, that like it feels like you get stuck very often because it's very hard to find the information. So you have to break down everything and then study the fundamentals and then try to integrate. I spent some time looking at this as well, but the issue with this one is that there's two different things here. One, it uses Node.js to create the graph, which means that it's not the stuff that I want to do, because it's like creating the graph from the server side and then saving the graph and then serving the saved graph on the browser, which is not what I want to do. I want to create in the browser. So I looked into this one, which it seems that this is the code for the Fabric.js, which would allow me to do that. But then the issue with this is that there's 20,000 lines of code. And then I was debating whether or not to start from the beginning, because that would be better to learn, or to take like whatever I have from here, try to understand here. But I don't really like the way that it is, but maybe it's because I don't understand it really well yet. I think now is a lot more clear for me how it works, this one. And this is the reason why I thought that it would be better to just go from this one and then try to adapt to the stuff that I want. And the way that it works is that it uses this file, then creates this scene based on the WGL repository. And then this scene communicates with the other files, which have classes that determine how it constructs the lines and the nodes, I think. So the point collection, I assume this file here creates the nodes, and the line collection creates the lines. But only on these files alone, I don't have the information that you would allow me to create the physics engine. But I think that from the force layout, I can try to understand how it makes it so that it has the layout, and then I can change the forest layout, because from what I've seen, the forest layout integrates the physics engine that he uses for the library. He had a separate repo for that, but then he integrated on the forest layout, which is this thing here. So here it creates an animation, and then from the animation it creates the forest layout, I think. Yeah, because this is from forest layouts, so it passes this information, and then it stops, and then initializes the thing, which it creates the scene, and adds the information on the scene based on this object here, based on this class here, which is the scene which comes from the other library, which is WGL. So it's hard to understand because there's a bunch of libraries integrated with each other, but they are all over the place, let's say. So maybe one thing that I can do is just download everything and put everything that it uses on the file. I think that's what I'm gonna do. Because eventually, once I understand everything, I don't want to depend on these files. I want to have like all the source code on my stuff, and then use the source code, because then I want to modify the source code, and I don't want to rely on that dependency, because like the graph is a fundamental part of the website. So I think it's better, if as much as I can, if I can just get the source code and put like separately on my project, instead of having to rely on the loading the dependencies. So the most challenging part is both the camera, I think, and the understanding how to create the observables. The event listeners, which, as far as I understand, he also uses another library, which is the Eventify, which is another library he created to see for the event listeners. And obviously, it's really good that I'm grateful for this person for having done all of this. This is like a lot better to have all of this code than to start from scratch, I think. Even if I don't, like, for my thing, I'm probably gonna have to adapt a lot. But this is a common pattern that I've seen so far and that I experienced so far, learning everything, is that at the beginning it seems like very discouraging because there's so much stuff going on, and it's very hard to know like where to start because you don't know anything. But then, like, instead of trying to figure out everything all at once, like, you should give yourself time and then understand that the more you engage with the thing and the more you think about it, the easier it becomes, because you start being able to make the connections of everything. So the beginning is just hard because you have to separate like each component and try to understand each thing together separately, and then try to understand everything together to understand the design. Also, I hate TypeScript. So that's another thing that makes this tough. Yeah, so this Eventify is the thing that allows it to put all the event listeners, I think. So the challenge is I have to try to integrate this one, because this one allows you to move on the graph there, with the other one that is just a static graph. But the problem is that this one has 20,000 lines of code, so I don't think that's a good strategy to try to understand all of this. I think I need to understand how to create the event listeners and try to understand how to move the camera on the canvas, and how to integrate the physics engine on the other one, so I can create like more of a dynamic thing. And I think the example is here. You just click on the image, and then it allows you to and I think that the thing that I'm gonna do is the two things. Hopefully I can do that, which is one version in 2D and another version in 3D. I think 3D is better, but it's probably slower, so it's probably better to start with the 2D. So this is the fact that I want to achieve, where I can do, like I can move around and I can see like the graph like this. Now let's do this stuff first, and I'll think about this.
Fa.
Fa.
Does.
Fisso.
Fisso.
Set, unchanging.
3.
3.
3.
Desiderare.
Desiderare.
Desire.
Aria.
Aria.
Air.
Bene.
Bene.
Well.
Anche.
Anche.
Also.
Giocare.
Giocare.
Play.
Piccolo.
Piccolo.
Small.
Fine.
Fine.
End.
Mettere.
Mettere.
Put.
Casa.
Casa.
Home.
Leggere.
Leggere.
Read.
Mano.
Mano.
Hand.
Portare.
Portare.
Carry.
Grande.
Grande.
Large.
Compitare.
Compitare.
Spell. Words.
Aggiungere.
Aggiungere.
Add.
Anche.
Anche.
Even. Also.
Terra.
Terra.
Land.
Qui.
Qui.
Here.
Devo.
Devo.
I must.
Grande.
Grande.
Big.
Alto.
Alto.
High. Tall.
Tale.
Tale.
Such.
Seguire.
Seguire.
Follow.
Atto.
Atto.
Enact.
Perché.
Perché.
Why.
Chiedere.
Chiedere.
Ask.
Maschi.
Maschi.
Men.
Cambiamento.
Cambiamento.
A change.
È andato.
È andato.
He. She went.
Luce.
Luce.
Light.
Tipo.
Tipo.
Kind. Of thing.
Spento.
Spento.
Turned off.
Bisogno.
Bisogno.
Need.
Casa.
Casa.
House.
Immagine.
Immagine.
Image.
Provare.
Provare.
Try.
Noi.
Noi.
Us.
Di nuovo.
Di nuovo.
Again.
Animale.
Animale.
Animal.
Punto.
Punto.
Point.
Madre.
Madre.
Mother.
Mondo.
Mondo.
World.
Vicino.
Vicino.
Near.
Costruire.
Costruire.
Build.
Se stesso.
Se stesso.
Himself.
Terra.
Terra.
Earth.
Padre.
Padre.
Father.
I put some music for myself, I think, in the background. So I think what I'm gonna do is get the code that I deleted from here and then use ChatGPT to try to see like how I can change these parts. So I'm gonna put this there. I think this is the part that I deleted. Font path. And the image, this is the part that I deleted from the other one. So it's doing a fetch request to this file here, which is another file from this project. And this other thing that I don't understand, which is the image. It's creating new image, but there isn't anything. So I guess it comes from the class here, the gel collection. And I also think I deleted some of this other stuff. Yeah, this thing here is making another fetch request to another thing. So I need to understand like what is the difference or how to make it so that I can add something else to this without. Maybe I'll put the file again the way that it is here, and then I try to just change the part of the code that uses a fetch request. I think that's what I'm gonna do. Yeah, this is the part that it complains. The other thing that I was thinking about doing, and I might do eventually, is to create something that allows me to transform my speak into text and then send that text to ChatGPT and then transform the text from ChatGPT into text to speech. That way you can communicate with ChatGPT without writing anything. It becomes a lot easier. And then instead of doing this stuff here, I can just communicate, and maybe I can use the OpenAI API to do that. And then you could create theoretically connect this with the site and then ask ChatGPT about the parts of the code from the graph as you go over it, and then you would explain the connection of everything. Oh, maybe I have to get it from the original one because I forked this, so it's not gonna have the knowledge because it's new. And so I think what it's doing is getting the position from the alphabet because the file provides the information here. I think that it uses. It provides all the information for each character in the alphabet, and then it gets the position based on that, and then it adds to the, I don't know exactly, also it adds to GL collection instance of the class. And then based on that, it renders the frame. This is one of the reasons why it's tough, is because a lot of these functions are connected to other classes, so I have to look at all of them simultaneously. Like, this is why it's annoying, and why I was thinking about doing from scratch. Because then it's hard to keep track of the stuff that is happening here when you go navigate through the other repositories, try to understand them. But this is just a byproduct of the thing being big. So like there's not much you can do about it, I think, from the perspective of the person that created this. It's just hard because it's complicated. So it's like it's not their fault. So the program probably comes from the other class, this class here. Program. And this is the stuff that is used to communicate with WebGL. So it has all the information. And then from this, it's probably going to have, or maybe it doesn't. It needs to have the function there for the program here, the set texture. So maybe it comes from this class. No. Yeah, I think this library here is the one that is used to do all the calculations for the canvas. So this element here is probably a base class to handle the manipulation of the canvas while communicating with WebGL. Hmm. So it probably comes from Eventify. Oh, I should have. I can just open here. Just see. Yeah, it doesn't come from anywhere here. And the constructor has an API list, and then this pushes the block, and this is the block. So I need to understand how this function is used. So it comes from this stuff, which is the use here to define the program. And this gets the text program. So like this is the interface, I think. So it uses the stuff to communicate with the WebGL. So this is some function that is used in the communication, which is probably part of WGL, but then how is it connected there? That's the thing. So I'm gonna do different program API new function, GL program draw code. So I'm gonna get this repository and I'm gonna ask questions about it through ChatGPT. So it is in this file, but then I'm gonna in this folder. But I'm gonna give the link to ChatGPT of the whole thing. And then I can navigate with ChatGPT to see if I understand. But I think I get the overall picture so far. So this is the bridge between WebGL and the graph that it creates based on the framework. And then from this stuff, it creates all of the stuff that is needed to create the vectors inside of a WebGL. So it creates the text from there. From the graph library, it puts all the format needed, and then it passes to this API so that this API transforms the information in a way that WebGL can understand by creating the program. And then it probably passes back, and then together with this, there's the Eventify library as well, which is used to put the event listeners on the graph. So I have to understand how the connection is made between all of them, and then based on that, I can, once I understand, I can see if I can change this stuff. Like ideally, I would be able to change just like a small thing and then see if it works. But this is part of the challenge of things like that, because then if I change on the file there, I'm gonna have to think about all of this stuff that is connected, because one change is gonna change the whole design of everything. So it's gonna be hard to see. Like, because ideally, obviously, I want to make a change and see if it works here. But it might not be possible because everything is connected. I think I'm gonna start a new chat history. I think the create scene is the fundamental part, and then from the create scene it has everything that is connected. It's kind of like a body where the create scene is like the integration of everything, let's say. And then each part is an organ of the thing. The other classes. So maybe I will start from like the top level, let's say. Let's see, source engine. Maybe we should close the other ones as well, because there's too much stuff open. And I will just open them again if I need it. And there's already a mistake because there is no engine JS here. Usually that's how it responds as well. When it makes a mistake like this. I think there is like fundamental things that are missing for this should be AGI, but I think it's really close. But I think what's most likely to happen if it continues like this is that there's gonna be like AGI is gonna be born of multiple different APIs communicating with each other because it's kind of like a body where you have the illusion of a centralized structure, which is the identity, the self, the ego. But in reality, it's just a connection of different decentralized systems to some extent because decentralization only exists in relationship to centralization. So the communication between all these systems creates this illusion of separation, which is the multifractal structure of spacetime. So I think that, and it might be like unstoppable, that's the thing, because of the game theory of macroeconomics. So, because then ChatGPT communicates with other artificial intelligence, and because of the arms race, everyone's creating artificial intelligence. And then all the products that are integrated with this, and then from the connection of all the APIs and all the different products, then is born like the network system that is AGI. And I think that, like other people said, that is like an impossible problem to solve because it's uncontrollable by definition. Like, but you, in a sense, like you can make the same argument about human beings. That's the thing, because we have the illusion of control because of the ego. But everything that you do is a consequence of the state of the universe, which is the interaction of all the particles that exist. So in some sense, you don't have control because it's just an illusion. Because every action you take is a consequence of the air you breathe and the water you drink and all the biochemistry of your body, which makes the abstraction that you create, which is the identity, which is the synchronization of your self, your ego self, with space-time. Because every pattern that you have is the connection of yourself with the environment. So it's like just protocols of communication that are a consequence of your hardware, pretty much, which is your biochemistry. So it's just the nature of the collective consciousness is the connection between the distribution of genetics and the way that like it evolves over time from the interaction with itself, which creates the wave function, which is the transformation of the normal probabilistic distributions that create genetic mutation, and the forced natural selection that creates the Pareto distribution, which is the pattern of reproduction. So this creates the wave function of the collective consciousness, which is the transformation of the informational field. And I think that the AGI works like pretty much in the same way. The internet works pretty much in the same way. Because from one standpoint, like you can make the argument of like whether or not something is sentient, but then it is always a question about where you put the boundary between things. Because the boundary is always an illusion that is always relativistic to the frame of reference that is experiencing itself. So you can look at the AGI already being alive, because in a sense, like all the actors in the system are incentivized to acting the way that they act because of the game theory. So like there is no bad or good person, let's say, because everyone is just acting based on whatever genetics they have and the environment and the rules of the system. And that's why people like are building, is like not that they have control and they like are building because they're evil. It's just because that like from their perspective they don't see like a way to stop it because of the game theory. So it might be already like a living being in a sense, in the same way that the like you can look at a market economy as being a living being, a living organism. In the same way you can look at a company as being a living organism, because from one perspective you can think about the individual as having autonomy and agency inside of the company to make decisions, but overall in the macro perspective the company is just a collection of a bunch of individuals making decisions, which from another perspective you can look at the body in the same way, which is just a bunch of molecules interacting with each other. But at some level of perception you have the illusion of centralization, which is the ego and the identity, but it's just an illusion because it's a multifractal pattern that depends on the relativistic interactions between different perceptions, let's say, different scales of perception. Because all the complexity is always the same. The only thing that changes is the perception over the scale of perception over the geometry, which creates the mathematics and logic, because it creates the construct of concepts. But I think that is much more likely for AGI to be, let's say, in alignment with life, if it is built out of the blockchain, I think, of some pattern of the blockchain, because then it's much more likely that if the MEV is solved correctly, that it evolves to a point of equilibrium, because then in the nature of the network, you would have the integration of life itself, which means that the communication protocols and the incentives of each API system that creates its own like AGI, let's say, would be in alignment with the overall pattern of life, which is a multifractal pattern. But you can't make it align with only human beings, obviously, because that would be short-sighted. And I think that's the biggest like risk that people say, because if you think about it, human beings, don't give a shit about other animals or living things, let's say. It's kind of indifferent. And AGI could be the same way, but this could be like something that you don't have control over it, because the problem is that morality is always relativistic to the experience of the observer. Because what's good for human beings may not be good for other species, and vice versa. Because if you think about temperature, let's say, we can say that the global warming is a problem, but for other species that would benefit from having a warmer or hotter planet, for them it would be like a beneficial thing for the temperature to increase. So the boundary of the temperature is always relative to the observer, which creates the information system of life, which is the evolution of genetics, which is just the different tensors of information that are electromagnetic fields that are created based on geometry, interacting with itself and creating the Nash equilibrium of the present moment in time, which is the configuration of space-time, I think. So, but as far as like we have control, I think that the best thing to do is to try to create AGI in the blockchain, because then you can try to make the incentives of each node of the network to be in alignment with whatever fundamental aspects of life exist from the standpoint of what we know so far, which is the best we can do. So like take all the physical principles that make up life on Earth, and then try to create a structure which is a network system that maintains the balance in relationship to the distribution of power across the system from that framework of reference, which is the physical principles that make the thing alive. So it's like you're creating a body from a network of nodes that communicate with each other over a protocol. And then the key, and that's why the key, I think, is to solve MEV, because then that determines what is the Nash equilibrium distribution of the relationship of power between each node. That is going to evolve over time. It's going to create this wave function of natural selection interacting with genetic mutation. But I think that there's no point as well in being scared about this or pessimistic, because it's always about the balance. And I think that from the current perspective that I have, you can't really die, because the fact that you exist already means that you have to live for, at least a part of you is going to live forever. Because if it wasn't like that, then you wouldn't exist by definition, because it's just a relativistic thing. Like if the only way for time to not be cyclical is if the past doesn't exist, which is obviously not true, because the past exists to some extent in relationship to a reference frame that creates the illusion of past and future, which is the identity frame that creates space-time. So you can make the argument that the past only exists to the extent of entropy, because then like the reference frame creates the past from the present. But even if you make that argument that what dictates the arrow of time is entropy, it still creates the paradox and the problem, which is that eventually the past that exists right now is not going to exist, because the reference frame is always moving forward and linearly through time, which means that the only way for time to not go back would be if that process is irreversible, which means that the past wouldn't exist at some point for the reference frame, which means that it would be impossible for you to exist right now, because in the future, the past of the now wouldn't exist. So that means that it is inconsistent with the laws of physics, I think. And that's why I think that reality is interdimensional, and space-time is a byproduct of a configuration of the electromagnetic field, which creates the illusion of separation between observer and what's being observed, which is the multifractal pattern of space-time. So it means that it's impossible to die, I think. Fully die. Like, you can't really say anything about what keeps going, because in a sense you are the distribution from infinity to a point of singularity, which is the flow of information that creates the entropy, which is the hologram of separation that creates the multifractal structure of space-time. So it's a paradoxical point, I think, the point of equilibrium. So you can't be pessimistic about AGI because like there's no reason to kill yourself, because that's the under the illusion that the past afterlife is going to be better than the present, but that perception is already a consequence of the perception itself, let's say, because the perception creates the symmetry. So you can't run away from yourself, let's say, because you live forever. So the point of balance, I think, is just to try to achieve Nash equilibrium over the distribution of power as the shift to from now to AGI. So it's not being optimistic because that is not realistic, but it's not being pessimistic because then that's also unrealistic. So it's always the balance, which is the paradox between the polarity, which is always relative. And that's why I think that the structure of identity is a multifractal paradox, because the paradox is the highest approximation of truth you can get, because that's the nature of identity, is a relativistic perception. And that's the flow of time, I think, which depends on the density, which is the frequency of awareness that creates the distribution of densities of space-time, which creates this self-fulfilling prophecy, which is the scientific paradigm. So I think everyone that has this view about AGI that is either going to be a utopia or dystopia, or it's going to be centralized or decentralized, but embedded in that there is the symmetry of perception that creates the polarization. And I think the reason why we think like that is because technology creates polarization in relationship to social structures because they're not very effective in balancing the distribution. So the consequence of the polarization that is created in politics and everything else is because of our lack of ability of regulating the distribution of power, which creates this notion of the polarization between dystopia and utopia. But they are codependent. They only exist in relationship to each other, which means that the most likely thing to happen is somewhere in the middle, because that's the evolution of information, which is a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is the multifractal paradox, because that's how information is created. Because perception can be only a conversion in symmetry and not symmetrical itself, because if it was symmetrical, you would have boundaries, which means it wouldn't be infinity. If it wasn't infinity, there would be an infinity that encapsulates that finiteness. And you can't get any other way, so the bottom line has to be infinity. And if it is infinity, it can't be symmetrical because it doesn't have a shape. But at the same time, paradoxically, it does, because that's what creates the boundary. And that's why the nature of space-time is a multifractal, and it's always converging towards a relativistic symmetry, which depends on the interaction of conscious agents, I think, which is the model from, forgot the name of the guy, Donald Hoffman, yeah, the Markovian, whatever the fuck he talks about. But the problem is that, like, from a selfish standpoint, from the ego, like there's a lot of risk, because then the relativistic symmetry from which everything is evolving to may not integrate your biochemistry, which means it would mean that you die in some sense, because your biochemistry doesn't maintain itself through space-time, and because every living thing is designed to keep going like this, and then the tensions between different biochemistries create the structure of the informational field. Then it creates this paradoxical point where obviously you don't want to accept your own death, but at the same time, like, there's no reason to resist, let's say, because, like, regardless of what happens, is always going to be converging in symmetry in relationship to the reference frame of identity, which is like God or whatever you want to say, that exists forever and is a part of everyone, because it's a funnel of information, relativistic funnel of information that creates the hologram of space-time. I think one of the reasons why we are incapable of distributing power correctly is because of this paradoxical nature of space-time. Because we are not capable of fully understanding the resolution that creates the connection between the symmetry, which is the polarization of the electromagnetic field, and that's why there's always the arguments itself is the computation of the Nash equilibrium, the relativistic Nash equilibrium over a geometry of space-time, because that's what creates the evolution of information. Because the point of equilibrium is always relative to the observer, and that's the reason why you need the interaction between conscious agents to get to a relativistic equilibrium, because it's always relative. Because it's a consequence of your biochemistry. So that's what politics is. It's like a bunch of people arguing about stuff based on their biochemistry and their incentives of their biochemistry to perpetuate itself in space-time, and that generates the oscillation between the normal probabilistic distribution that is a consequence of genetic mutation and the natural selection, which is the pattern of reproduction, which is exemplified in the market economy, which is the system that allows us to evolve, because allows us to dominate the environment because of the competition between these different genetics that creates the pattern of hierarchy, which is a pyramid, that everything is always evolving through because it's related to the composition of space-time. So in relation to the environment, there's always this change in frequency, which goes from a normal probabilistic distribution to an exponential distribution, which is a Pareto one, which is always going to be different because it depends on the geometry of the environment. And that's why different tribes are created, and why human beings don't scale that well, because you have this lack of alignment between, because the consequence, the nature of the geometrical structure of society is a consequence of the geometrical pattern of space-time, and that creates differences in genetics. And I think that's why you have different races, let's say, like white, black, and Chinese, and everything else, because the genetics is feeding itself through the environment, and this creates a different pattern of a multifractal, that is the normal probabilistic distribution becoming an exponential distribution in relationship to other distributions, that creates the multifractal structure of social structures that changes over space-time, which is the reason why different countries have different boundaries and in different abstractions, and then different abstractions create different laws in different languages and different culture, because it's a consequence of the way that the informational system evolves itself in relation to space-time. But the problem is that the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex are not really capable of computing the correct equilibrium, because they don't have the correct resolution over the four-dimensional structure of the multifractal geometry that creates the relativistic polarities that make up innovation and technology. And that's why it's out of balance. And that's why we think that everything is always evolving towards the polarization, because it's not that this is the only state. I think it's just the consequence of the evolution of social structures, because the lack of ability of the relationship between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex to compute the correct relativistic Nash equilibrium, because of the lack of ability of regulating the power, because it becomes a vicious cycle. Because the momentum of the gravity that it creates doesn't have enough force to balance itself. So it's like the mass of the collective consciousness is always becoming more and more exponential, because it lacks alignment, so that the gravitational force that the lack of alignment creates the power, and then with more power, it amplifies the movement of the lack of the balance between the pendulum over time, and that creates the gravitational force, which creates the polarization of the structure over time, because small imbalances are acceptable when you don't have a lot of power, because you can barely feel them. But then, because that small imbalances creates more and more power through technology, then it gets more and more mass, and then each small imbalance of the structure becomes more and more amplified, because that's what power does. And then as a consequence, you have the polarization of everything. I think that the only way to balance that would be to create something autonomous on the blockchain that has the integration of all the nodes, because then you can, based on all of the stuff, you can derive what would be the better computation for trying to regulate the power over any environment. But that's extremely hard, because That's the reason why the market economy scales and politics doesn't scale, because market economy, you don't need to know all the variables up front. You just calculate the thing in real time based on the interaction of the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, which is supply and demand. But then, because you need to know the variables to calculate politics, because politics is the reactive system in relationship to the expansion that the market economy provides, then it becomes lagging behind by definition. And I think that what we have to do is try to, as much as possible, approximate the balancing this frequency and make it harmonic, let's say. So the politics would be able to regulate itself based on the rate of expansion from the market economy. I think the only way to do that is the blockchain. That's why you always have this relativistic symmetry, and the evolution of information is the relationship between these different polarities that create the multifractal structure of the geometry of the current configuration of spacetime, which is an informational field. You'll be right back. I'm back. I don't know. not getting too much done because I'm thinking about all of this other stuff. That's usually what happens though. It's very hard to not think about all of this stuff. Especially when everything is evolving so fast. Does this stuff exist on my code here? It has to because it's the same thing, but I didn't remember this. Also, I don't understand really well like these addresses here. I don't know how he comes up with this stuff. It's always confusing to me when I see people doing code like this. Like, how do they know the memory address of the thing? Like, it's obviously something that I don't understand. And there's so much to learn as well. It's crazy. Yeah, so what I'm trying to do, again, is to get the tags from here. To understand how the tags is created. Understand this. So maybe I should go back to the other file to remember this one. So let's see. Yeah, I want to understand what kind of information I need here. It's creating the map from the alphabet from the file. I think is that the file has a bunch of information there. As far as I remember. Is this file here? Let's see if I doing raw. It's gonna allow me to see. And this is the problem, because I don't understand really well like where if this file is necessary. So maybe I should ask a more generic question. Oh, this is the reason for the name here, I think. There's something with SDF texture. And it creates this image here, which must be from this thing. Or this. Maybe it's something from JavaScript, a native object, but I've never seen that. Yeah, TypeScript lib. I guess it's just from JavaScript and TypeScript. HTML image elements. So it creates this image thing. Then loops over the font info, which comes from the file. Then it gets the Unicode from the characters and then adds to the map of the alphabet. It's the value and the character as a... So this is going to create the Unicode value, I think, of the character, and then it's going to map to the character itself. And then this MDF image is the thing here. So this is probably, it has to be a function of the object there that determines what's going to happen with the image when it loads. And then it uses the set texture canvas from the program. Sets width and height to the image. So I think what it's doing is creating text based on the image and the mapping from the file for each character. Yeah, so the problem is that he's associating the label with the image, I think. And that's not what I want to do. So on this, there's the image with the nodes. I think that the nodes are created from this image here. Not the nodes, the label. But maybe there is another way. I'm gonna take these steps here and I'm gonna do exactly what it is doing here. I'm gonna follow the steps and I'm curious to see. Oh, I don't have the file. But if I put the file, it's probably gonna work there. But I think I understand what he did now. So it has the two files. One is the image, one is the mapping. And then he combines the image and the mapping to create the label with a WebGL. So maybe I should use the ones that he has there. It's probably easier. Then I don't have to do the other stuff. Because this is not that big of a deal, and the only reason why I'm trying to do with my own thing is so I understand better how it works. The fuck is this? I think I'm gonna delete this. I think I'm starting to understand how it works. Let's see if I can. Problem is that it's not gonna give me a good answer, I think, if I put the file there. I'm gonna create the same folder that it has here for the files. Maybe it should be on static. I think I'm gonna put it on static and then fonts. And I think I need to have the PNG. So this gets the context of the current thing. So I think I get it. That's the current context and passes this through this class, which is the GL. And extension, super. This gets the tax program based on this class. Which is gonna be this thing here. I think it makes more sense to have the file instead of creating the file each time. So the way that he did it makes sense. That's pretty much what ChatGPT is saying, but with an extra step because of the way that I'm asking. Yeah, so this is pretty much the thing that he did there, I think, before. So first you get the file that is a JSON, and then you use that file to create this range here, to create this. But in his case, I think he got both of them, and then he's just using the image to map. So first he creates the map of the characters from the JSON, and then he uses the image file to load them into the buffer, which is the thing that is going to create the font with WebGL, which communicates with the program there. Yeah, so I think the first step is to get this, select a font from this. I'm gonna search without showing because I don't know what's gonna show here. So, like on the images. So the first step I think is getting one of these fonts and then saving to a file like he did there. And then I just change. I wanna see if I can change the thing so that it doesn't use a fetch. I think I can just import the file. I think that's better. Import and then I load with JSON, I think. With the JSON method from JavaScript, and then based on that, I can loop over the file and do the same thing he did and just select or maybe I add an extra step just to see, to create the image from the font using the generator that ChatGPT talked about, and then I can just, yeah, but the problem is I can't really call from the command line because I'm doing from the browser, so it's probably better to have the image. That's probably why he did it with the image already. But if I was using Node, I think I could get this system to create the file using the command line arguments there. And then from the image, you create the map from the file, from the JSON, and then you connect with the image. Maybe I will select any of these, like, because it probably doesn't matter that much. It's more about understanding how it works. I think I'm gonna use this one. Oh, this is already a lot. Oh, how the fuck do... Oh, download family. Interesting. Hmm. I think it's fine to use this. Yeah, so it's fine. I think I'm just gonna follow whatever GPT is telling me to do. This seems correct. The only thing here is I'm not sure if I should put on the static because that's where the icon is at, or if I should put on the somewhere else. I think it might be better if I just put on another folder, because it's just easier to access. But it might be a mistake. Maybe I should put it inside of here, because that's the point, that that's the folder that is gonna use the fonts. So I think I'm gonna put here. And then I have to close the thing, because then it's gonna give me permission to put here. So where else is this used? Oh, here. I have to close this. It should be in the same level here. Fonts. So here it should go to this directory here, I think. So it's from this one. Let me see if yeah, it should be correct, I think, here. I think this function doesn't exist on the file there. Yeah. But I think you will be something from this thing here. Oh, and this, see, fonts. That's the thing here is gonna have. And fonts, Lato regular, TTF. Yeah, Lato regular. So I think the only thing is changing this. So I will import in this file and then I remove this thing here. But then, because it's fundamentally different, so I think I'm gonna have to write some stuff that transforms this TTF into JSON or something like that. So what I'm gonna do is just put this function here inside of the, send this to ChatGPT, and then see like how to change this. Well, this is definitely the easier option. But yeah, so I can use import instead of require. I'm gonna have to use fetch anyway. And that's the other option, is to download or copy this stuff into a file. And this is probably the whole library here. And then import the file into the other one and use this one. I think I'd rather download the thing though. So I'm gonna install with Yarn because I think it's easier. Here's the part that is complicated because it's kind of hard to know what to change exactly there. Maybe this is easier, but I think that the other one is better because it's more, like once I read, I'm gonna understand more. And the loop I don't understand really well. And I think I understand what's going on. It's just a little bit confusing because this here, the image is inside of the fetch request, but I think I should get rid of this stuff here. And then I should put this stuff here. It's alphabet mapping. And then the image is gonna be the mapping from whatever happened there. But then that's the thing, because in the way that ChatGPT said there, it doesn't have, like, it doesn't integrate this with anything. So like there's no relationship between this stuff here and the other one. That's what I'm struggling to understand. So it should be through the alphabet here, I think. Because the alphabet is what creates the mapping. So this loads the font based on the type here, and then creates these options. And then this loop creates the map based on the bytes for the characters, I assume. So this gets the Unicode for characters from A to Z based on the bytes that are these numbers here. And then from this it creates this glyph, which is the image, maybe? Font get glyph. And then, like, the loop here is gonna create the mapping for the characters with their values, their Unicode values. The same way that it was doing before with the file, but now it's getting from the other file, which is the TTF. Font info chars. Push. And the problem is that the image is not related. And here it doesn't make sense because there's nothing in the queue yet when it gets to this point. This is what I don't understand. So how are these two things related here? It has to be through this function, but then, like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And so here is getting the text info, which should be done before. It's the connection there that I'm struggling to understand. The challenge of doing this. Because then, because I erase the other one, it becomes hard to think about the connection between the two. No, it's already like this. Hmm. Yeah, but I don't understand because I already downloaded this, so I don't know like where is the image. Is that the font file, true type font file, or is something else? Yeah, so it's pretty much gonna be the same, but I just need to understand. I understand, but I don't remember, like I don't know how to create the code myself, only with the fetch. You need to fetch from the file, then put the then statements to get the data. And then with that, I don't understand really well the connection between the two here in this code. Like I get that it's gonna create the mapping from the file, and then it's gonna, from this mapping, create the image, using the image that we have there. Create the text from the image. It's a combination of the JSON that has the information for the text, and the image that creates the texture for the WebGL, I think. That's how it works. But the nuances here is hard to understand because the way that this is written, it's very confusing to me. Because there's a bunch of things involved, and everything is connected. Yeah, so inside of this function is that the connection is made, I think, because it's using the alphabet and it's getting the char from the text that is passed here, from text info, which is here. But what is this? Like, how is looping through the queue if the queue is empty? I don't understand. Like, it must be something from this other stuff here, but I don't get it. Maybe it's here. Like, it doesn't make sense because it seems like this is being created before. But this, maybe this just returns the function So it's like currying the thing. And then later on it triggers this based on these other functions here that have the text information. So it creates the program as initializes here, and then it uses the information that it gets from these other functions to load the program. Let me remember how this is used. Yeah, it's used here, it creates this thing, then calls this function, which is gonna call the clear method here. So it sets count 0. And then for each node, it adds the text, calling this function here. So I guess that this is the stuff that creates. So in the beginning, it just set up the text and the image, and then based on this stuff here in the nodes, it creates the text that creates the program. Because, oh, I think I get it now. So let's see on that text here. Is ready. So this is going to be false, which is going to be true in the beginning. So it's going to push the stuff. It's going to push all text info and then return. But then I don't know, like, how does it create the thing? Okay, so text info comes from here, which is gonna be the label of the node, I think. Okay, text here. So yeah, it's the string from containing the information from the node. Then X is the node position, because each node is like a class, and the class has this stuff when you initialize the graph. And the limit is based on the amount of nodes that the graph has. This CX is probably something related to the context, I assume. So it passes this object through this here. So text info font size. So how does it know the font size? Yeah, so it doesn't have in this case, so it probably gets from here. But then, yeah, this is the part that is assigned in the beginning, maybe. Yeah, font size options are true. So it's gonna get the true. Different than undefined. So if there's a limit to the text passed here in the options, which it does, which is going to be the size. So it's going to loop through the text, which is this string, maybe. And where is the... I remember seeing... It's going to be equal to the information on the node, but where did I see that? Where did I saw that? What the fuck? It was on the other file. I'm getting confused. Oh, here. Yeah, so it's passing as an object here. The text info is an object. So how does it have access to the text? Oh, it's because it's destructuring here. Okay, so it's getting the information from here. And then it's looping over this string here, pretty much. Which is gonna get all the characters for the label, I think. And then it gets from the mapping, the char, which has the Unicode value. I don't understand why it skips it if it has it. And if it doesn't, it just advances. SDF. So how is this possible? What is X advance from this thing here? It comes from char info. Which is the width of the text. Makes sense? So, like, from the concept level, everything makes sense, but the problem is the nuances here. It's very hard to understand. And then here, just there's a calculation based on the limits times the size divided by the width, I think. The total width of the text. So it's pretty much reading the string of the text, getting the total width of the thing based on the ones that don't exist on the mapping. And then that's going to be the size of the font, which is the limit times the size of each one. Font info size, which is true. So the limit times true divided by the width of the ones that don't exist here. But why does it get the ones that don't exist on the alphabet? I guess it's taking, like, it's getting the spread of the ones that don't exist with the ones that exist to determine the size. Scale font size divided by the size on the info. Same thing here. The x is probably delta x. Just subtracts the width from the width of the context, from the, width of the context with text info in the scale. Which depends on the font size. Yeah, so this is going to be undefined because it doesn't have cy here, only y, but it does have cx. So the cx is the width of the thing. I'm starting to understand more, I think, how it works, but it's still confusing. So, like, it's pretty much a bunch of calculations to calculate the position and size of the text based on the scale, which is going to depend on the information here, because that's the information from the nodes. So when it's drawing the labels, it's drawing the stuff using the text information. So I think I get it, but the whole thing about the image and the thing I don't understand really well yet. And then after this, it renders the frame again. The frame is based on the scene. So it's like re-rendering every time after it updates, which is based on the event listener, which is from this event 5 that I don't understand really well. But I think what this does is just create custom events. So it creates like subscribers and listeners for the events, which makes the thing change based on the event. And this is from the interface, and this is from the class, I think. Yeah, create scene. So renders frame, return a path. Which is the animation frame. Interesting. Which is, so this is pretty much based on the cycle of the cross animation frame. And there is called without anything, so it's gonna be false, I think. The first one. Which means it will go through this, I think. So it's probably this function here that is passing here. I think I'll be right back. I think I'm gonna make something to it. And then I'll watch some videos while I eat and then continue to do this after. It's very tricky to change because I'm concerned that I change something and then it becomes really hard after that I change to understand what's going on. Because everything is connected. It's kind of hard. I think I should focus one thing at a time and try to make it work with the just changing the stuff there that I'm trying to change, and then I'll go back to try to understand everything. But the problem is obviously that if I change there, it might blow up, and then it's because everything is involved, and it's gonna be hard to debug. So this is a vertex object. It is based on the position. It is based on everything else. And char is the object here. Where is this? Maybe it's because I deleted the thing. Should be char info, I think. Yeah, char info should be the char there. This alphabet set. Yeah, it's because it's setting on the alphabet. That makes sense. Char value. So get char because it's the thing, so this is gonna be the key. It's gonna be the value actually for the char, which is gonna be the object, which is the char info. So this thing STF position is gonna be the char info from this thing here. It's gonna be this object that contains all the information for the character. I think I get it now. The mapping here, because this is made from this file. So it maps the chars, and then this becomes the object that contains all the information, and uses this information to build the text there. And this is just structuring the canvas using that MSDF thing that ChatGPT talks about. So it's setting up the image object, empty image object, for the program using this function set texture canvas. And then it's gonna loop through each character. This is still confusing to me because the queue is supposed to be empty here. This is what I don't understand. So what is exactly this for each doing? It doesn't make a lot of sense. But it might be because of the code that I deleted there. That's the problem. So did I do this? Oh no, fuck. I had this problem before, so it's gonna be a pain in the ass. Because this stuff is related to C++ and the MS build. And I couldn't find a way to fix because I had to look into the binary for MS build, but I can't access that. It's just a pain in the ass because I'm using Windows. Fuck. So it's just better to get the image somehow instead of trying to deal with this bullshit. It's because of MS build. I remember I spent, I think, 4 or more hours trying to debug this thing. And this is pretty much a library that uses the command line to use MS build to download stuff, I think, and Python as well. There's something related to that. And then because I'm using Windows, it doesn't understand really well, or there's something wrong with MS build, the version of MS build, and then it can't get the correct location for the file, or do the installation correctly, or something like that. But then it depends on the MS build executable. That's the problem. If this one works. It's gonna be the same problem because of C++. So annoying. I think I will try this one anyway. Even though I think it's not gonna work. So you have to install this VS, whatever the fuck. So I have to put this on the path. Yeah, there we go. So the way that it works, I think, is if this installation works because of usually have problems with C++ with CMake. CMake is a tool from C++, I think, to download. It's kind of similar to npm, I think. But then if it works, then I use this executable and put the mode here, and then I put the input, which is the location of the file, I think, the font, which is probably the exact file, location for the exact file that has the font, and then that should convert the font into this image that has the distance field. And then once I have the image, I put the image on the folder, and I do the same process that he was doing there. But it might, if it doesn't work, I think I'm just gonna go with the way that he did it because it's just easier. I'm just doing this stuff so I understand better how it works, everything. But I think right now I can understand a lot more than I did in the beginning. But the problem is I have to create a script, probably, that goes over all the character codes. And this is from GL. Creates the code for the thing. And it looks like OBS. Okay, we're connected. I think I'm gonna stop here and then I'm gonna go eat something and come back. So if this works, I might try to do it with this. As far as I understand right now, I have to use the executable to convert the fonts that I have here into an image. And then after I've saved the image, I pass the image to this folder probably. And then I do the same thing that he was doing here, but then I load that image instead of this one. But if it doesn't work, obviously, I'm just gonna do the way that he was doing there, which is a lot easier. I was just trying to understand how everything works here. But I'm still a little bit confused about... But I think I kind of get it, because this loop is gonna create the object for the font info, and then the only thing that I don't understand is this queue here, because it's supposed to be empty at this place, so I don't understand how it loops over this if there is nothing to loop over to create the text. But I guess this function is going to be called when there's an event to onload. So by that point, the queue might have some things, because there's some other code that adds the elements to there, because this is just on the constructor. So I think that it might be possible that the add text info is called, and then it loads. But then it doesn't make a lot of sense to put this inside of the constructor. But maybe it does, because it's just an event listener and it's not triggering the function. So I think that's what's happening here. Is just setting up the event listener for the onload for the image. And then later on, when it initializes the graph, it's going to call this function from the labels here, which is done through the initialization of this class, I think. Yeah, it creates here based on this variable here, which is set up to true when it initializes this class. So yeah, so when it initializes this, it creates this, which creates the class here, and then it calls the function which draws the labels, which is this one. So if first is gonna clear, and then for each node is gonna call this function. So because the class is already initialized, then it calls this directly, and then from this one, I think it starts off like this, I think, and then it pushes the stuff to the queue. And then once it pushes, then it's gonna have stuff here to call to add the text when the image loads, I think. But it's very confusing, to be honest. I don't like the way that it was done that much, but maybe it's because I don't understand really well yet. But I think it's looping over the graph and then preparing the stuff here. But this should add the nodes already, that's the thing. But this is initialized to false in the beginning. Oh, it's initialized to true, to false, but then it becomes true instead of this thing. Yeah, there isn't any function here. So this should be, let's say, after it does this, it continues and appends the labels to the scene. Which is this object here. Which is gonna be on the other file. So it's putting the stuff on here. The children of the sea. But I don't understand exactly how does the thing work on the beginning. Because the thing is gonna be false, so it's gonna just append each node, each text to the queue, I think. But then what triggers the event of the image? That's what I don't understand. But maybe it's because it has twice here. No, it doesn't make sense. Or maybe when it does this step, it redraws the labels again, and then draws the graph. Maybe that's why. So in the first time, it just adds everything to the queue, the text to the queue, which are these objects here that contains the labels. And then it appends everything here. But then what happens after? Then I think here so I think here is the part that it's after it does this step here. In this scene creates the first object. Then the other is this one. And this creates the physics setting. This is the one that I didn't investigate yet. Stuff because of this. I have to go to the file, but it doesn't go. I have to go manually then on the node modules. But let me see if I can figure out without this. I think it just passes the graph and then passes the physics thing, which I would like to know after. So maybe I can go here, but then let's see if I... Oh, but then what the fuck is this though? So it creates the points and the lines from these objects here, from these classes. This, I think, is easy to understand. And then here it creates the label based on the function. So this is going to append all the tags to the queue based on this. So this comes here. And the thing is already initialized there. So this is going to be true because text is ready is false. So it appends everything to the text, to the queue, the text info. And it returns. Appends one by one, obviously, because it calls the function each time for each node. But then what I don't understand is at what point this is gonna be true. Because it has to be when the image loads, but it doesn't make sense because there is no place where it tells the... Yeah, it triggers the onload event for the image. This that I don't understand. It's setting count to 0. What the fuck does that mean? It's here. Yeah, just how many items are in the rendered collection. Setting this number to 0 makes WebGL clear the collection. In subsequent add, it goes to clearing the collection each time. So let me go back. I think it's on the request animation frame that it makes it, maybe. It has to go here. So this is the end of the function, then goes back here. And it passes the frame, which is a function that I think is down there. And this creates the loop, I think, for the... So I think here is the place that it creates the first graph, which is in the function down here. So I think at this point, get node position. Maybe at this point, it's triggers the thing. Oh, it's on the layout, so it's gonna be on the file that I haven't seen, which is the forest layout file. So it's gonna trigger this function here. So when it triggers the draw function, it's probably the place that it activates the onload thing. It's so confusing. Because it's supposed to be triggering this function, I think. Because this is a children. This is a child of the other great sing thing. And then it calls the draw on the program. But this still has nothing to do with the image. So maybe WebGL triggers the download on the image. It's the only explanation that I can think of. And then from that, it gets the items from the queue because it's gonna make ready there. Yeah, I think I'm gonna stop here. I'm gonna think about this a little bit. I'm gonna go eat something. Maybe I'll come back after, but probably I'll come back tomorrow. And I'm gonna continue to study this.